Hi, I'm David Chen, and this is Trailers from Hell. Today, we're going to talk about a generational classic. When I think of the heyday of video cinema, and I don't mean shot on video cinema, but I mean films that were made primarily for the video market, Maniac Cop is one of the first films that I think of. And I actually think quite a bit about Bill Lustig, who's one of the few filmmakers that I can think of who kind of like gradually started in sort of the what we now call grindhouse, but really, 42nd Street cinema, and made the move nicely into video store cinema. He did it with such an aplomb. I remember I met him when I was about 15. I met him at a pizza store in New York, and I went, Bill Lustig, I love Maniac. And he looked at me with abject horror and said, "How old are you?" So he was a guy who was, just a real, at least in the 1 minute I spent with him in the interviews that I've seen, a real just kind of like New York hustler, pulling things together sort of filmmaker. And so it made all the sense in the world that he would team up with Larry Cohen, who is sort of like the king of the B movie. I was just saying that when the independent digital revolution happened and anybody could make a movie, I dreamed of getting a new, Quentin Tarantino or Coen brother, every week. And instead we've just gotten like $100,000 really boring, or 100,000 really boring hangout movies for $100,000. And what I long for are the go for broke, just crazy movies that this movie really stands in for me, with a great cast and crew. And without further ado, I think it's time to get into the trailer for Maniac Cop.
There is something in the streets. Hey! Something in the shadows. Something in the dark that kills.
You're trying to tell me
This movie is stacked. Funnily enough, this is one of the trailers that really impacted me as a kid. It was like one of those forbidden movies. And that's what the video market really provided, like whether it was like, Charlie Band or like Lloyd Kaufman. But we often think of these movies as kind of shoddy. I find Bill Lustig to be one of the best of these filmmakers because, he really, really went for it. And there's such iconic imagery. And he's a real lover of cinema. This movie's just got such a stacked cast. Tom Atkins and Bruce Campbell and, great cameos. And it has this deep-seated like grime to it, which a lot of his movies have, but it really was the perfect intersection of his understanding of horror and action. Larry Cohen was the idea guy, and this is a movie that is a big idea. It's a police officer or someone who appears to be a police officer killing civilians, and there's intrigue and there's conspiracy and there's just all of these twists and turns that you just don't see in cinema anymore. And it's really fun. It feels tabloidy. It feels just kind of like gross and naughty. And that's kind of the reason that I think it spawned this franchise. And he was making, obviously, I think the last big Bill Lustig kind of like iconic film like this was Uncle Sam. But even that, these movies don't exist anymore in any real sense. And it's such a New York, nasty New York movie. I think it's talked about as one of the last New York exploitation films, which was a really beautiful subgenre that we just genuinely don't have anymore. I mean, of course, we have like Larry Fessenden and people like that who, will make New York-centric movies, but they're not this kind of like oddly commercially minded, but as though you found like the most demented person on a Reddit forum, to use like modern parlance, and said like, hey, we're going to let you make a studio Hollywood movie. And also just like all these stunts where people for sure came within an inch of their deaths, and you can feel it when you watch it. That's Maniac Cop.
Starring Bruce Campbell from Evil Dead. Maniac Cop.